The afternoon sun blazed down on Manila, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement where vendors lined the streets, shouting prices over the noise of jeepneys honking and tricycles sputtering past. Among the chaos, a boy no older than 12 sat cross-legged on the curb, clutching a guitar that looked as though it had been rescued from a junkyard. Its body was chipped, the strings rusted, and the wood was worn smooth in places from years of being played. Yet in Miguel's hands, it was more than an instrument. It was his voice, his memory, and his lifeline. Miguel's clothes were simple: a faded t-shirt, patched shorts and flip-flops that were nearly broken. His hair fell into his eyes, damp from the heat, but he barely noticed. What mattered to him was the song. Each time he strummed, the world around him seemed to pause, even if just for a second, as if his music could momentarily soften the harshness of life. He began to sing. The first notes of Hotel California floated into the air. His voice young yet strikingly soulful. People often wondered how a boy from the streets of Manila could carry such depth in his tone. The truth was simple: Miguel wasn't just singing words, he was pouring out memories. The song had been his father's favorite. Before his father passed away from illness, he used to sing it to Miguel at night, teaching him the chords on this very guitar. Miguel still remembered sitting on his father's lap, tiny fingers struggling to press the strings as his father encouraged him, whispering, "Music is hope, Miguelito. No matter what happens, sing. And you will never be alone." But his father was gone now, leaving Miguel with a grieving mother, and a younger sister, Liza, who often cried at night, when hunger gnawed at their stomachs. His mother worked long hours washing laundry for neighbors, but it was never enough. So Miguel did the only thing he knew how to do: he sang. The busy street wasn't a stage, but Miguel treated it like one. Jeepneys zoomed past, filled with passengers who rarely looked out the window. Some pedestrians hurried by, too wrapped in their own struggles to notice the barefoot boy. Yet a few slowed their steps, drawn in by the haunting familiarity of the Eagles' classic song. A businessman paused, his stern face softening as he fished a few coins from his pocket. A street vendor clapped along for long before returning to her sales pitch. Miguel didn't sing for applause or admiration. He sang for survival. Each coin that landed in the small tin can beside him was a piece of bread, a handful of rice, or a school notebook for Liza. He had learned not to expect generosity, but every peso mattered. Despite the harshness of the street, Miguel smiled between verses. His smile wasn't one of ease but of courage. Deep down, he knew he was carrying his father's voice forward. Every time he sang, he felt his father close. As though the man who once sang under the same sun now stood beside him, proud. A little girl stopped with her mother, her eyes wide with wonder as she tugged at her mother's skirt. Miguel noticed her staring and gave her a shy wave before singing louder, more confidently for her. The girl grinned, clapping in delight. It was in these fleeting moments, when someone truly listened, that Miguel felt rich, richer than any peso could make him. But not everyone was kind. Now and then, teenagers passing by mocked him, tossing out cruel words about his worn clothes or broken guitar. Miguel kept playing. His voice unwavering, though deep inside, the sting of their laughter lingered. He reminded himself of his father's words. "When you sing, Miguelito, you're not just singing for them. You're singing for yourself, for the world, for God." As the golden hues of sunset began to screw across the city, Miguel's voice grew hoarser, but he refused to stop. This was the hour when crowds swelled, and more coins might drop. He thought of Liza waiting at home, her small stomach empty, and pushed himself harder. His fingers ached from pressing the strings, but he strummed through the pain, eyes closed, lost in the music. The chorus echoed against the concrete walls and tangled power lines, "Welcome to the Hotel California." It was almost ironic. Miguel had never been inside a hotel, let alone one as grand as the song described. His hotel was a tiny shack with leaky tin roofing that turned to mud during the rains. Yet when he sang those words, he dreamed. He imagined stages, lights, and an audience that truly saw him, not as a poor boy on the street, but as an artist. Passers-by couldn't help but glance back. There was something magnetic about him, something that made people think twice about rushing past. Some dropped coins, others simply listened for a verse or two before hurrying along. Miguel didn't mind. Each person who heard his song was proof that he mattered, even if only for a moment. That evening, as he gathered the few coins from his tin can, Miguel whispered a quiet, "Thank you," into the air. Thank you to his father for teaching him. Thank you to the strangers who gave. Thank you to music, the only constant in a life filled with uncertainty. He stood, slung the battered guitar over his shoulder, and began the long walk home through the labyrinth of narrow alleys. The city still buzzed, but within him, there was peace. He had sung with all his heart, and that was enough, for today. Miguel didn't know that somewhere, among the countless people who had heard his voice that day, someone had captured it on video. He didn't know that by tomorrow, millions would hear him sing. All he knew was this. He was a poor boy with a guitar, a memory, and a song. And as long as he had those, hope was alive. The night after another long day of singing, Miguel sat in his family's small shack on the edge of Manila. The tin roof rattled under the evening wind, and the dim glow of a single bulb flickered above. His mother counted the coins he had brought home, sighing as she separated pesos into neat piles. Some for rice. Some for cooking oil, some to save for school supplies. Liza leaned against Miguel's arm, her small head heavy with sleep, as he hummed the same tune he had sung all day. To Miguel, it had been just another ordinary day. Singing, hoping, surviving. But far away across the digital highways of the internet, something extraordinary was already unfolding. Earlier, while Miguel had been lost in the chords of Hotel California, a tourist, a young woman from California herself, had paused on the busy Manila street. She had been struck not just by the familiarity of the song but by the passion in the boy's voice. Despite the noise of the city, his singing cut through like a clear bell, raw and soulful. Without thinking twice, she had pulled out her phone and recorded a 2-minute video of him singing, the golden sunlight catching his tired yet determined face. She uploaded the clip that night with a simple caption. "This poor Filipino boy sings better than most artists on the radio. Please listen." By morning, it had exploded. Millions of views poured in. Comments from all over the world flooded the post. "His voice gave me chills. I cried listening to this. Someone get this boy a chance." The hashtags began to trend: I Filipino street singer and Fi Hotel California boy. Miguel, however, knew none of this. The next day, he returned to his usual street corner, barefoot and smiling, strumming the same battered guitar. People began reacting differently now. Some approached him directly, saying they had seen him online. Others snapped photos, sharing them instantly. A vendor clapped him on the back and laughed. "You're famous now, Miguel." He thought they were just being kind, or perhaps teasing. Fame was not something boys like him ever imagined. It wasn't until a week later that everything changed. As Miguel finished a performance, a well-dressed woman in her 40s approached him. She wasn't like the usual passers-by who tossed coins without a word. She stood still, watching until the last chord faded, tears streaming down her cheeks. Miguel froze, unsure what he had done wrong. "Are you Miguel?" she asked softly. He nodded, hugging his guitar closer to his chest. "I've been looking for you," she said, her voice trembling. "Do you know how many people around the world are talking about you right now?" Miguel blinked, confused. "Talking about me?" She pulled out her phone, showing him the viral video. His own face stared back at him, frozen mid-song, with a counter below reading tens of millions of views. Miguel's jaw dropped, he couldn't comprehend it. This is me," he whispered. "Yes, Miguel," the woman said with a smile. "The world has already heard you. And now, they want to hear more." For the first time in his life, Miguel felt a glimmer of something larger than hope. Could this really be happening? The woman introduced herself as Maria, a volunteer for a Filipino non-profit that partnered with international charities. She explained how people across the globe were reaching out, offering donations and opportunities. One particular message stood out: a scout from America's Got Talent had seen the video and wanted to invite Miguel to audition. Miguel laughed nervously at first, shaking his head. "That's not for me. I'm just a street boy." Maria knelt so that her eyes met his. "You are not just a street boy, Miguel. You are a singer. And singers belong on stages, not just on sidewalks." He looked down at his guitar, the wood so scarred it seemed impossible to belong anywhere near a television screen. His heart raced with fear. What if he wasn't good enough? What if people laughed? But then he remembered his father's voice, "Music is hope. Sing and you will never be alone." 2 weeks later, with donations covering travel expenses, Miguel found himself stepping onto an airplane for the first time. He clutched the armrest nervously, Lisa holding his hand tightly. Their mother, though unable to join them, had kissed them both at the airport and whispered, "Make your father proud." As the plane soared into the clouds, Miguel gazed out the window, Manila shrinking below him. He had never dreamed of leaving his city, let alone his country. His whole world had been a few streets, a few alleys, a few songs. Now, suddenly, he was flying thousands of miles away to sing in front of the world. When they landed in Los Angeles, the air felt different. Cooler, crisper. The streets gleamed with neon lights, the buildings towering far higher than anything in Manila. Miguel's heart pounded as they drove past billboards and endless streams of cars. For a boy who had grown up playing guitar on cracked sidewalks, it felt like another planet. At the hotel arranged for him by the show, Miguel marveled at everything: the soft bed, the hot shower, the endless food. It felt unreal, almost like he had stepped into the very lyrics of Hotel California. But even with all the newness, he never let go of his battered guitar. He carried it everywhere, clutching it like a piece of home. One evening, as he sat on the balcony strumming softly, Maria joined him. She listened quietly before saying, "Do you know why the world loves you, Miguel? It's not just your voice. It's your heart. People can feel your honesty when you sing. That's something no amount of training can create." Miguel swallowed hard, staring down at the guitar. "I'm scared," he admitted. "What if I fail?" Maria placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You cannot fail. Because even if you sing just one note, and it's honest, you will have already succeeded." Those words sank deep into Miguel's soul. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine what might happen. A real stage, real judges, a real chance. That night, as he lay in the hotel bed staring at the ceiling, Miguel whispered a promise to his father. "I will sing, Papa. I will sing for you. For Mama, for Lisa. For everyone who ever stopped to listen on the street. And I will not be afraid." He didn't know yet how powerful that promise would become. But the world was about to find out. The bright lights of Los Angeles were nothing compared to the blinding glow inside the America's Got Talent studio. For a boy who once sang beneath flickering street lamps and neon vendor signs, the stage looked like a universe of its own. The air buzzed with anticipation, cameras shifted on heavy cranes, and the murmur of thousands of people filled the vast auditorium. To Miguel, it felt like standing at the edge of a storm, both terrifying and electric. Backstage, he gripped the neck of his battered guitar so tightly his knuckles whitened. He could hear the muffled roar of the crowd every time another act ended. Some performers laughed with their families, confident and experienced. Others cried from nerves or clutched hands in prayer. Miguel sat quietly on a folding chair, his little sister Lisa at his side, holding his arm like she always had when the world felt too big. "You can do this," Lisa whispered, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. Miguel forced a smile, but his heart pounded so hard he thought it might leap out of his chest. His palms were sweaty, and he kept wiping them on his shorts. He thought of home, of Manila, of Mama waiting by the radio, of his father's memory. He had sung countless times on the street, but this was different. This was America. This was the world. A stagehand with a headset bent down to his level. "Miguel, you're up next." Or Miguel swallowed hard. Was he ready? No. But he nodded anyway. He stood slowly, his legs trembling beneath him, and slung the guitar over his shoulder. Every step toward the stage felt heavier, as though invisible weights clung to his feet. Then the curtains parted. The sight made him gasp. A massive theater stretched before him, filled with thousands of faces. The ceiling glittered with lights like stars, the stage floor gleamed under spotlights, and in the distance sat four of the most famous people in entertainment. Simon Cowell, Sofia Vergara, Heidi Klum, and Howie Mandel. The crowd applauded as he shuffled into the center, dwarfed by the space. He adjusted the strap of his guitar nervously, his head lowered. A hush fell over the audience as Simon leaned forward. "Hello there," Simon said, his familiar British accent cutting through the silence. "What's your name?" Miguel's voice quivered as he answered. My name is Miguel. I come from the Philippines." The audience let out a collective "awe." Miguel's accent was heavy, his English simple, but his sincerity shone through. "How old are you, Miguel?" Haiti asked with a warm smile. 12. He replied, clutching his guitar tighter. "And what will you be singing for us today?" Sophia asked, leaning in with genuine curiosity. Miguel glanced down at the guitar, then back up. His throat felt dry. But he forced the words out. "I will sing Hotel California for my father." There was a pause, soft murmurs rippled through the audience. Simon tilted his head, curiosity sparking in his eyes. "Hotel California. That's quite a big song," he remarked. "Are you sure?" Miguel nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. It was my papa's song." Simon studied him for a long moment, his usually sharp expression softening just slightly. "All right then. Let's hear it." The lights dimmed. A single spotlight bathed Miguel in golden glow. The silence was deafening. His hands trembled as he positioned his fingers on the strings. For a split second, fear threatened to overwhelm him. What if his voice cracked? What if the judges pressed the red buzzers? What if millions watching at home laughed at him? But then he remembered his father's words, "Music is hope. Sing. And you will never be alone." Miguel took a deep breath. His first strum echoed into the cavernous hall, rich despite the guitar's age. Then he opened his mouth, and the first line of Hotel California floated out. Trembling but unmistakably soulful. The audience fell silent. Miguel's voice carried something raw, something beyond technique. It was the voice of a child who had lived too much, who had felt hunger, loss, and yet still found beauty in the world. His notes rose and fell with an honesty that pierced straight through the noise of the modern world. The lyrics, so familiar to everyone in the room, sounded reborn in his young voice. By the second verse, Miguel forgot where he was. The bright lights, the cameras, the judges, all melted away. He was back on the streets of Manila, the sun setting. His father's spirit beside him, he sang not to impress but to remember. Each note was a prayer, each chord a heartbeat. The crowd began to stir, some leaned forward in awe, others wiped at their eyes. The judges exchanged glances, their faces shifting from polite interest to astonishment. Even Simon, the critic known for his cold exterior, seemed caught off guard. His usually furrowed brow softened. His eyes fixed on the boy who sang as though life depended on it. Miguel's voice smalled as he reached the chorus. His small frame shook with effort. But the sound that poured out was big enough to fill the hall and beyond. The audience erupted in cheers mid-song, unable to contain themselves. Miguel kept singing, tears shining in his eyes, each word carrying the weight of his father's memory. By the time he reached the final lines, the entire auditorium was on its feet. A standing ovation thundered through the space. Miguel strummed the last chord. His chest heaving, his hands trembling. For a moment, silence returned. The boy looked down at his shoes, unsure if he had done well or failed completely. Then the applause roared again, louder than before. Miguel lifted his head, stunned. Thousands of faces smiled and clapped for him. Not because he was a street boy, not because they pitied him, but because his music had touched their souls. On the judge's table, Simon sat motionless, his eyes glassy. He leaned toward his microphone, whispering something almost to himself. "This is why this show exists." Miguel didn't yet understand what those words meant. All he knew was that for the first time in his life, he wasn't invisible. He was standing in the center of the world's stage, and they were listening. And this was only the beginning. The last note of Hotel California still lingered in the air like smoke after a firework, hanging over the silent auditorium. Miguel's fingers trembled against the guitar strings, his chest rose and fell rapidly, and for the briefest moment, he was afraid. Afraid that maybe the clapping had been just polite. Afraid that maybe his voice had not been enough. But then, like a tidal wave, the sound hit. The audience roared to life, erupting in cheers that shook the hall. Thousands of people were on their feet, clapping, shouting, whistling. The applause rolled like thunder, deafening and endless. Miguel blinked against the lights, his vision blurred by sudden tears. He had never, in his entire life, been in a room where every single person stood for him. Sofia Vergara pressed her hands to her chest, eyes wide in astonishment. Heidi Klum wiped at her eyes, visibly moved. Howie Mandel leaned forward, shaking his head in disbelief, as though trying to process what he had just heard. And then there was Simon Cowell. He didn't move right away. He sat still, his hands clasped in front of his mouth, his gaze locked on the small boy standing with a battered guitar that looked far too fragile for such a mighty sound. Simon was known for his brutal honesty, for rarely showing vulnerability. But tonight, his eyes glistened with something raw, tears he tried but failed to hide. "Miguel," Simon finally said, his voice lower than usual, almost breaking. I don't think I've ever been this surprised on this stage." The audience hushed instantly, hanging on every word. Miguel swallowed hard, not daring to move. Simon continued, his words careful, his eyes still misty. "You came here with nothing but your voice and that guitar. And you gave us something no money, no training, no fame could ever buy. You gave us truth." The crowd erupted again in cheers. But Simon wasn't finished. His expression shifted, softening even more. He leaned closer to the microphone, his voice trembling slightly. "Do you know what, Miguel? You reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place. It's not about perfection. It's not about fame. It's about moments like this. When someone sings from their soul. And the whole world feels it." By now, tears streamed freely down Miguel's cheeks. He couldn't believe the words he was hearing. Simon Cowell, the man everyone said was impossible to impress, was telling him he mattered. Sophia leaned in, smiling warmly. "You're a little boy with such a big heart, and you brought it here, to all of us. Thank you for sharing your story and your song, that was beautiful." Heidi added, her German accent gentle, "You are so special, Miguel. So special. You don't even know what a gift you have." Howie nodded enthusiastically. "You're what this show is about. Not gimmicks, not tricks, real talent. Real heart. And you have both." Miguel's tears spilled over, his hands covering his face. The applause thundered again, he shook his head overwhelmed, as if trying to wake from a dream. And then, suddenly, Simon stood. The crowd gasped, knowing what was about to happen. Simon placed his hand over the golden buzzer in the center of the judges' table. He looked back at Miguel, his voice steady now, filled with conviction. "Miguel," Simon said, "I think the world needs to hear you. Right now. Right here. And I don't want to wait any longer." With that, he slammed his hand down. The golden buzzer lit up in a burst of light. The auditorium erupted in screams of joy as the confetti cannons fired. Golden flakes rained from the ceiling like a shimmering storm, cascading down around Miguel in a magical shower of hope. Miguel gasped audibly, his tiny frame frozen in shock. He raised his hands to his mouth as if to hold in the sob that escaped. His knees buckled, and for a moment, he thought he might collapse right there on the stage. He had seen the golden buzzer on television back in Manila, but never, not even in his wildest dreams, had he imagined it would fall upon him. Lisa rushed out from the wings, tears streaming down her face as she threw her arms around her brother. The two clung to each other beneath the golden rain, sobbing and laughing at once. The cameras zoomed in, capturing the raw, unfiltered moment. Two children who once had nothing, now standing in a storm of gold. The audience chanted his name, Miguel, Miguel. Simon stood clapping, his eyes red. For the first time in years, perhaps, he looked not like a critic or a judge, but like a father himself. Someone deeply touched by a child's bravery and gift. Sophia, Heidi and Howie all stood too, applauding with wide smiles, their eyes glistening with tears of joy. Backstage, the crew wiped their eyes, caught in the emotion of it all. Even hardened producers and cameramen found themselves choked up, whispering to each other. This is history. This is one of those moments. As Miguel stood there, his sister's arms tight around him, he lifted his face to the ceiling. The confetti stuck to his tears, glittering on his cheeks. He whispered, barely audible over the roar, "Papa, we did it." And in that moment, the poor boy from Manila who once sang for coins on cracked sidewalks was no longer just a street performer. He was a global star. The golden buzzer had changed everything, not just his future, but his belief in himself. The boy who once feared being invisible had become unforgettable. The confetti continued to fall as the music swelled. The lights blazed, and the crowd roared louder than ever. Miguel stood at the center of it all, holding his guitar close, his sister in his arms, and his father's memory in his heart. For the first time in his life, Miguel didn't wonder if his voice mattered. He knew, and so did the world. The golden confetti may have settled, but Miguel's life would never be the same. Overnight, The poor Filipino street boy who once sang for coins became an international sensation. His golden buzzer performance was replayed millions of times across social media, news outlets, and television stations. People from every corner of the world word about him, shared his story, and sent messages of encouragement. But while the world saw the bright lights and the magic moment, Miguel carried something much deeper with him. The memory of where it all began. The return to Mama. When the show arranged for Miguel and Liza to call home after the episode aired, their mother answered the video call from their small Manila shack. She wore her worn house dress, her hands still raw from scrubbing laundry. But her face glowed as tears streamed down her cheeks. "Mama," Miguel whispered through the screen, holding up the golden buzzer confetti he had saved in a small plastic bag. "Look, Mama, we made it." She pressed her hand against the screen as though she could touch his face. "Anak, my son, your papa is smiling in heaven. I know he is." Liza held the camera closer, grinning. "Mama, everyone in America clapped for Miguel! Everyone!" Their mother laughed through her tears, shaking her head in disbelief. "My little boy from the streets, making the whole world listen." For Miguel, that call meant more than any applause. It was proof that his dream wasn't just his own. It belonged to his family too. From the streets to the stage, weeks turned into months as Miguel continued in the competition. He sang not only for survival anymore but for purpose. Each performance felt like a love letter, to his father, his mother, his sister, and the countless children still singing on sidewalks back in Manila. Though the competition was fierce, Miguel's humble spirit and raw voice kept winning hearts. Whether he advanced or not didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that his story had been heard. Back in the Philippines, neighbors gathered around old televisions in crowded living rooms, cheering every time Miguel appeared. Street vendors who once dropped coins into his can now pointed proudly, telling customers, "I knew that boy. I heard him sing right here." He had become a symbol of hope, proof that greatness can rise from the most unlikely corners. The offers and opportunities after AGT, opportunities poured in. Record labels reached out, television interviews lined up, and music schools offered scholarships. But Miguel's heart never strayed far from home. His first request was simple. "I want to buy Mama a real house. One with a roof that doesn't leak." With his earnings, donations, and the generosity of people worldwide, Miguel's family moved into a modest but sturdy home. For the first time, Liza had her own bed, a desk for her schoolwork, and a shelf of books she adored. Their mother no longer had to work herself to exhaustion washing clothes. Miguel's second request surprised many. He asked the charity and sponsors who supported him to help build a small community music center back in his old neighborhood. "There are so many children like me," he said in an interview. "So many who sing on the streets, not because they want to, but because they have to. I want them to have a place to learn, to dream." The music center opened a year later, painted in bright colors, filled with donated instruments. Miguel often visited, teaching younger kids how to strum guitars and reminding them that their voices mattered. A global voice, Miguel's journey didn't stop with AGT. He was invited to sing at concerts, cultural festival events worldwide. His rendition of Hotel California became iconic, but he also began writing his own songs. Songs about hope, about family, about never giving up. One of his original songs dedicated to his father went viral, climbing charts across several countries. The lyrics spoke of loss and longing but also of resilience and love. Critics praised not just his voice but the authenticity of his storytelling. Despite the fame, Miguel remained the same humble boy, who once smiled at strangers while playing for coins. When asked in an interview how he stayed grounded, he said softly, "Because I know where I came from. I know what it feels like to be hungry, to be invisible. If I ever forget that, then I lose my song." Simon's words months after AGT, Simon Cowell invited Miguel back for a special reunion performance. Backstage, Simon pulled him aside. "Miguel, I want you to know something. I've judged thousands of singers, but you're different. You don't just sing. You remind people why music matters. And I'll never forget the day you walked onto that stage." Miguel's eyes filled with tears again. He had once feared Simon, the man known worldwide for his toughness. Now, Simon had become like a mentor, even a father figure. The legacy of a song years later, Miguel would stand on stages far grander than the streets of Manila. But no matter where he went, he always carried the same battered guitar. When asked why he never replaced it, he smiled and said, "Because this guitar is my story. It's broken, but it still sings, just like me." At one concert, after singing to a packed stadium, Miguel closed with a message. "I was just a poor boy who sang for coins. I didn't know the world would ever listen. But one person shared my song, one person believed in me, and because of that, everything changed. If you take anything from my story, let it be this: never underestimate the power of kindness. And never stop singing your truth. Even if you think no one is listening. Because one day, the world might hear you." The crowd erupted, not just because of the music, but because of the truth they felt in his words. A full circle moment, on the anniversary of his father's death. Miguel returned to the street corner where it all began. He set up a small stool, pulled out the same old guitar, and began strumming Hotel California. People passing by did double takes. Some recognized him instantly. Others just stopped to listen to the hauntingly familiar song. But this time there was no tin can for coins. This time Miguel sang not for survival but for love, for memory, for gratitude. His eyes lifted to the sky as he whispered between verses, "Papa, the world heard me. And it was because of you." And though the busy Manila street carried on with its usual chaos, jeepneys honking, vendors shouting, it felt, just for that moment, as though the entire city paused to listen. Closing message: Miguel's story wasn't just about a boy who got lucky on a talent show. It was about the power of music, the resilience of the human spirit, and the extraordinary ripple effect of compassion. A stranger with a camera. A mother who never stopped believing. A boy who refused to let poverty silence him. He had once been just a child singing for coins, but now he was a symbol, for Manila, for the Philippines, for every dreamer around the world. And as his journey showed, one voice, no matter how small, can indeed change the world.